right, we'll call to order Finance Committee, Monday, October 25th. I may have a roll call of committee members.
Mr. Besser?
Here.
Ms. Cheney?
Here.
Mr. Pritloff is not here.
The motion to recuse Ms. Crinow.
Motion.
Second. All those in favor? Thank you. We have an agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
And I will second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Will be registered to address the committee with minutes from September 30th.
Make a motion to approve.
I will second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And with that, Mr. Lanzer will take us into our financial packet for September.
Alrighty, for the month of September, the village had an adjusted bank balance of $3.7 million. Of this amount, $3.6 million can be found in the village's primary checking account, and the remaining balance rests in the village's several law enforcement funds. I always like to note that despite the figure found in the village's primary checking account, the vast majority of this amount is actually accounted for in several road and street funds that can only be used for those purposes. For the month, the village has 72 cleared payments that total $423,000. The most significant payees for the month were payroll at Lita, which is the construction company that was hired to do the Vera Road project, Rumpke, Jefferson Health Plan, which is the employee health insurance, and Ohio Police and Fire pension. Meanwhile, the village received 34 payments that totaled $176,000. As for the general fund, where there's most interest, the village received $78,000 in income tax receipts for the month. This amount was slightly less than what the village received in September of last year by approximately $6,000. Despite this, however, the village income tax receipts for the year exceed those from the same point last year by approximately $50,000. So the village is on track to exceed the total figure from last year in income tax receipts. And actually, for the month of October, I believe we've already brought in close to $100,000. In regards to property tax receipts, if you recall, the village received the second half disbursement of property taxes in August of this year. Last year, the second half disbursement was received by the village in September. So the difference between total receipts and property taxes, let me back up. For the year, though, the difference between total receipts and property taxes is just north of $29,000 to the village. So when we consider total property taxes, we generated $29,000 more this year than we did last year, moving in the right direction. Total receipts in 2021 are $687,000 compared to $650,000 in 2020. Total revenues for the year are $1.8 million. This figure is $125,000 more than what the village received at the same point last year. And again, the village is on track to meet or exceed total forecasted revenues. As for appropriations, the village spent $195,000 in September of 21. This amount was $49,000 more than what the village spent during September of last year. I think the most significant reason for this through September of last year is 6%, and village administration is monitoring this closely and will make any. We had a meeting just last week. Is there anything that turns you really afraid that we couldn't move out?
No, I think there's area.
So we should be on track.
There's more year over year. Is that, I don't remember having that big number last month for the August packet. For the major expenses that we saw.
We had the bigger bit of road project.
Okay,
That was the big one.
All right, that makes sense. I just want to understand that.
And most of that is actually pass-through monies. So Waterworks wants to do is doing water main replacements on Vera. They like to just schedule water main replacements whenever there's a road project. Those are not actually appropriations from Gulf Manor. We have to account for a believe, in the general fund. But it's pass-through money from waterworks through us to contract. Payroll. Again, we had processed 3 payrolls. There's a unique quirk. So if you look on the sheet, you actually, it will look like there was only 2 payrolls, but there was an adjustment that we had to make. So the bank, even though payroll was scheduled for October 1st, the bank processed the payroll on September 30th. So we had to account for it in UAN as though it occurred, even though it was actually paid out in October. So there's an adjustment.
Gotcha.
That's not accounted for directly in payroll.
Okay.
That happens from time to time. I don't know why. It happened once last year as well.
Any questions? No. All right. I know there's 2 topics. So the police program funding discussion, the economic development revitalization fund. If there's a preference in the order you'd like to go.
Well, I can do the Economic Development Revitalization Fund. I think Ron was going to discuss the program funding. He's not here this evening. I wasn't briefed on that, so I prefer to wait till next month if we can.
Yeah, and I think we can. I mean,
Is that okay by you?
Yeah, I'll go brief. So I spoke with Mr. Burke a little bit this afternoon about it. You let me know if you guys are going to attend. So
Right. He's done that.
yeah, so that's fine. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so the Economic Development Revitalization Fund. So one thing I wanted to discuss tonight and hopefully build some support for is creation of a reinvestment fund for the village. So typically in a budget, most municipalities have what's called a 2-legged budget. There's the operating budget and the capital budget. And the operating budget is the budget that covers salaries, utilities, debt service, maintenance, fuel, trainings. Things are typically associated with fixed costs and are used to make a municipality operate. That's the name. The other component is a capital budget. And the capital budget uses a tool to plan for a budget for the installation of things like buildings, parks, roads, bridges. In our budget, the operating budget is represented by the general fund, typically, the general fund, and police funds, while the capital budget, although not formalized, is represented by our road and street funds. So
we just have it all in one big fund, but
yeah, it's all in one. It's presented as one budget, but in reality, it's 2 separate types of budgets that form the total budget. A third component that I'd like to see added would be a reinvestment or revitalization fund. This concept is quickly becoming a best practice and operates a lot like a capital budget. So a revitalization or reinvestment budget would use resources for the types of activities that we think of when we say reinvestment. So property purchases, some communities are in the real estate or the landlord business. Those things that we associate, more broadly, things we associate with economic development. So Silverton has recently established one of these as a separate fund. They annually transfer money from the general fund to this fund, as well as house certain philanthropic grants, environmental remediation grants, rental incomes, proceeds from real estate sales and donations. Basically any type of one-time revenue. And they use it to cover all of their economic development projects. I think as we begin thinking about economic development, it's important to remember that we need to be proactive in this area. And I think establishing a fund like this will help us be proactive. I think the creation of this fund, even if we fund it $0 annually, will at minimum remind us that this tool is available when we should be thinking about how we make our dreams a reality. Unfortunately, we don't have dozens of benefactors like some communities knocking on our doors offering us money. I know some communities do. I wish we did. So I strongly recommend we think about committing some funds to economic development setting them aside directly for economic development, even if it means we have to make small reductions elsewhere in the budget. Ideally, I think one strategy could be making small transfers from any carryover balance at the end of the year. If we're fortunate, so we make a small transfer from a carryover at the end of each year, and then if we're fortunate enough to begin to acquire and sell properties for development, the fund would essentially become a revolving loan fund, where proceeds from one sale go into the fund to fund the next. But it could be seeded at the front end by a carryover, or it could be an annual thing where whenever if we project a carryover, and you all would set the percentage or the amount, we will make that transfer. Another thing to keep in mind is that grants are extremely important, especially to a community like Manor. But grants generally aren't available to cover 100% of an expense. They're there to close the gap between funding. So having a tool like this available that's funded could help us in that realm as well. So that's the end of my spiel. I'm happy to answer any questions or elaborate where necessary.
You mentioned in terms of the economic development revitalization fund,
Yeah.
Acquiring properties would be one possible use of that money.
Yes.
Where are these properties coming from?
Well, we wouldn't know. So I think that there's strategic in all Manor, like the land bank properties.
Correct. I mean, are we talking about land bank? Are we talking about sheriff auctions?
I think we're talking about anything and everything that's available.
Okay, so there's no limitations on that. Right?
No limitations.
Okay.
Anything that's economic development related, we can use this for.
Okay.
We know from the TAP study that site control was one of the biggest recommendations that they made for the village. This is not control. It's called site control, the strategic purchasing of properties.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that the village controls their development, as opposed to the village staying out of it and letting market forces, if there are any. I think we're seeing that there might not be that much naturally without some serious village investment, drive whatever development occurs.
Are other communities, so when you said like a percentage of the carryover, other communities doing something like that, what is that percentage?
It fluctuates all over the place. It depends on from community to community. I can reach out to Tom Carroll and see that.
Yeah, I'd be curious. So, and I would want to understand, so having done this like 3 years ago and contributed 10% of the carryover, whatever that percentage might be, would be curious, like what would be in that, I think this is important, especially with how we set our sights on 2022 and the economic development and having money in that that's not coming out of the service budget, right? So
yeah, and that's the thing to think about. I mean, we appropriate essentially 100% of revenues a year in our general fund, 100%. There isn't, when we're thinking about the budget at the beginning of the year, or the year prior, there isn't the to automatically dump in there. But we have found at the end of the year, we've been adding to the reserve each year. This would be an opportunity. I would prefer we make an investment in the village, and make an investment through something like this.
Versus dipping into the reserve or cutting from another.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree. Plus it gives us a little flexibility. So if we have to go raise the building or rent out the building, we're not taking from other departments.
Which we had to do this year.
Right.
Which we had done. So if you recall, the Stover apartments, they were boarded up at $6,000. It doesn't sound like a lot, but for a service department with 2 employees with a very small budget, that's a lot. And
Did we supplement this? Did we do a reappropriation for that?
We did from the reserve.
Right.
And
but in the meantime,
we wouldn't need to do that if we were making adjustments.
Interesting.
So if I hear, I get the sense that most of you are on board with this, we can look to get it legislation drawn up, and I can research some more best practices and have something ready to go at the November council meeting or the one in January.
I think it'd be great just having some other examples. And I don't know if the Center for Local Government has this model those legislation or percentages or whatever's for to help us kind of set some ground rules for it.
Yeah, so the community, two of the communities that pop into mind around here that I know have instituted this is Silverton and Lockton. Lockton has one as well, and Lockton uses it more as a remote.
Sure.
So this would allow us, like in the TAP study said, that we should be buying up properties here that aren't in very good condition. We could go in, we could remodel them and make a profit on it, put it right back in this fund. Continue on, approving.
I think it's a great idea, you know, to build up the community.
Mr. Graham, do you have a question?
Yeah, that's actually one of my college jobs is working for a nonprofit that was funded by the city. They kind of owned it. And that's exactly what they did. They bought all the blighted homes in neighborhoods. And I was the last guy there with paying for them. And they got them and redo them. And the funds that they received from the sale of the homes went right back into the fund. They never had to reseed it. And eventually it grew to where they were doing 3 or 4 homes. You know, we were doing 3 or 4 homes a summer, and continually it was a great program for them. And we had neighbors stopping by. We were taking the houses. Going, oh, it's great. I mean, it really did. We really experienced what people saw from it. So I'm definitely a supporter of this stuff.
Yeah. Let us, if that's something you can prepare for November, that'd be great.
Happy to do that. That's the end of my report.
All right. Do the committee want to discuss the police program funding, or do you want to table that for next month?
We can table it.
Right. Chief, you okay with that? Yeah. All right. We'll table that. I think it's an important discussion to have, so let's make sure we don't keep dragging it out. Heading business for the police detail pay policy. Any update there?
No update.
What was the question on that again?
On which part? On
On the police detail pay policy?
just creating.
Yeah, so the question is the OBI task force detail rate, because it's reimbursed by the state, what we're trying to do is set, instead of calculating each person's overtime hours when they do it, and also to make it eligible for the part-time officers to be able to do it, we want to establish, and we have the rules that it's permitted, and across the board detail rate.
Okay.
It's basically a matter of submitting the paperwork to Blue Ash, who is they're a managed partner for
Get like the managing agency for
the task force. So and that paperwork has actually been sent out, so we can complete that.
So then when someone else asks us, they don't have a detailed job for us, we just have a clear pricing for them, and it's all built in, and it's not.
Well, this is only for the OBI task force is a fund that occurs, I believe, in 4 counties, and they give extra hours reimbursable for agencies to do traffic enforcement, OBI, driving while impaired, seatbelt enforcement, things like that.
Okay.
And the hours are set, how many there is available each month. The number varies, it's usually in the same neighborhood. But those hours are worked, so if an officer does that when their shift is over, they're paid at the detail rate that we submit for reimbursement from the state. And it's just for that program.
Okay, I didn't realize there was a program specific. I understand.
And it encompasses, in theory, the entire expense associated with it.
Yeah, there's a percentage, they have a formula where they reimburse even towards the fuel and some of the benefits that we fulfill, the benefits expense that the village will incur.
Okay.
So if it's set at a certain number, we would get that number reimbursed for each hour that's worked, plus the percentage that covers those other costs associated.
With insurance and pension pickup, something like that. Okay. All right. ARPA?
Yeah, so the only thing is, I think Ron mentioned last time that because we're receiving the ARPA funding, we're required to state or have a plan for how that will be spent. I think originally we had to have that plan submitted to the feds by the end of this year. Ron has stated that the deadline for submission has changed to April of next year. So
have a little bit more time to strategize and think about, prioritize how we use that money.
That's the leftover money from what was already being spent on the playground equipment.
The playground's coming from that, yes.
So is it what, around 200 something thousand?
I believe the first payment we received $187,000.
Oh, that was the first payment was 187.
Yeah, we did a
about
second.
80 or something. From that, is that correct?
I don't recall specifically. I'm not sure that we've actually spent any of the ARP fund or any ARPA funding towards the playground as of yet. So I believe most of the cost was funded. Yeah,
We sent that.
we paid $50,000 out of the general
Mhm.
for $50,000 reimbursable.
From last year.
It's the grant.
It's a county grant. Yeah, so the county had leftover funding available from the CARES Act.
Oh, so it's just called account, okay, all right.
And the county obviously wants to get that off their books, so they offered us a $50,000 reimbursement grant.
Okay.
So we made that payment, and then I believe we submitted for reimbursement.
I'm still waiting for them to cash it.
Okay.
Yeah, checking every day. So Ron needs it, so we can
Submitted for reimbursement, and we need to get that done this year. We need-
Yeah.
That has to happen in this calendar year.
They had a check for a couple
So
of
you
weeks
think
now.
they're interested.
You think so? Like,
Yeah. The grant is nothing to them, so.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's small change.
but for accounting on our end, and your end, I need this done by the end of the year.
Right.
I may need to give them a call.
Yeah.
For some reason they're delaying.
Check the room.
So I believe the balance, whatever the total project cost minus the $50,000
That's what's coming out. of
will come out of our, which I believe is 27.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all right. All right, good, good, all right. Anything else? Next finance committee meeting is scheduled for Monday, November 22nd at 6 PM. With that, can we motion to adjourn? All those in favor? We're adjourned. See you